Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back to a time when work-life balance meant trying not to get your arm eaten by a steam engine before dinner. We're stepping into the damp, soot-caked boots of a Victorian factory worker. You're not just visiting, you're living it. And let's be honest, with your modern sensibilities and your strange need for things like antibiotics and basic human rights, you probably won't survive the first week. Actually, surviving the first morning might be a stretch. It's a world of gray skies, greasy air, and the kind of poverty that makes a modern studio apartment look like a royal palace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you tucked under a weighted blanket, or are you listening to this to drown out the sound of a city that never sleeps? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, but not because of a gentle smartphone alarm playing a forest bird melody. You wake up because the dampness of the wall has finally seeped through your thin shirt and reached your skin. It's about 4:30 in the morning. The room is pitch black except for the faint, sickly orange glow of a distant street lamp struggling against the gloom. You aren't alone. You're sharing this room with 5 other people, some of whom you aren't even related to. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale breath, and the sharp, metallic tang of coal smoke that seems to have a permanent residency in your lungs. Your bed is less of a mattress and more of a suggestion, a thin pile of straw that's been compressed into a hard, itchy mat. If you're lucky, you might have a 2-penny hangover, which is essentially a rope stretched across the room that you lean over to sleep standing up. It's the Victorian version of a budget airline seat, only with more lice and less legroom. You try to sit up, and your joints protest with a series of cracks that sound like dry kindling. This is your body's way of reminding you that you spent 16 hours yesterday standing on a vibrating wooden floor. In the 1840s, the concept of ergonomics didn't exist. It was basically a try not to die policy. You reach for your boots, which are stiff with dried mud and factory grease. They're less like footwear and more like 2 leather buckets designed to give you blisters. As you pull them on, you notice the saltpeter blooming on the brick walls like a fuzzy white fungus. It's beautiful in a tragic, this house is killing me kind of way. There is no bathroom. There is no refreshing morning shower with eucalyptus scented body wash. If you want to wash your face, you have to use a communal basin filled with water that looks like weak tea and smells like a neglected pond. You skip the wash. Most people do. You head to the corner where the pantry is, which is really just a shelf with a crust of bread that feels like a brick. This is your breakfast. It's not avocado toast. It's more like carbon and sadness. You might try to make some pauper's tea, which is a fringe Victorian hack where you take burnt bread crusts and soak them in hot water to mimic the color of actual tea. It tastes like a house fire in a cup, but it's warm, and in this drafty tenement, warmth is a luxury you can't afford to pass up. Historians still argue whether the standard of living actually rose during the early Industrial Revolution, or if the quality of life plummeted so drastically for the urban poor that any wage increase was offset by the sheer misery of their environment. From where you're standing, shivering in a room that feels like a tomb, the debate feels a bit academic. The reality is that in 1842, the average life expectancy for a common laborer in a city like Manchester was a staggering 17 years. Not because people died of old age at 18, but because the infant mortality and workplace accidents were so frequent, they dragged the average down into the dirt. You're already a survivor just by making it to adulthood, though adult is a loose term when you're 5'2" because of childhood malnutrition. You wrap a tattered wool shawl around your shoulders. It's itchy, the kind of itch that feels like 1,000 tiny needles, but it's the only thing between you and the creeping chill. You can hear the city beginning to groan to life outside. It's not the sound of cars or buses, it's the sound of thousands of iron-shod clogs striking the cobblestones, a rhythmic, haunting clatter that sounds like a mechanical heartbeat. This is the morning rush hour. There are no podcasts to listen to on your commute, just the coughs of your neighbors and the distant, low-frequency hum of the mills that are already warming up their boilers. You think about your smart home back in the 21st century, the one that adjusts the temperature and reminds you to hydrate. Here, your smart home feature is a leak in the roof that tells you it's raining before you even look out the window. It's a grim existence, but you don't have time to dwell on it. If you're late to the factory, the gates will be locked and you'll lose a quarter of your day's pay. Fines are the factory owner's favorite hobby. They'll fine you for whistling, for talking, or for having a dirty face, which is ironic considering the entire city is covered in a layer of soot that acts like a permanent, gritty makeup. The floorboards creak as you make your way toward the door, trying not to step on the various siblings and strangers sleeping on the floor. You step over a bucket of night soil that's waiting to be emptied, a pungent reminder that sanitation is a future problem for the 20th century to solve. You find your way to the staircase, which is narrow and steep, designed by someone who clearly hated people with knees. The wood is slick with moisture. Outside, the air isn't much better. It's a thick, yellow-gray soup that tastes of sulfur and charred wood. This is the infamous London fog, but it's not romantic or mysterious. It's a toxic byproduct of thousands of coal fires, and it's currently making its way into your bronchial tubes to set up shop for the day. You join the stream of people moving towards Seoul's the industrial district. Everyone looks the same in this light. Shadowy figures with hunched shoulders and hollow eyes. It's like a zombie apocalypse, but everyone is just really, really tired and needs a paycheck. You pass a small shop selling Godfrey's cordial, a popular patent medicine made of opium and treacle used to keep babies quiet so their mothers can work in the factories. It's a quirky, dark reality of the era. The entire generation is essentially being raised on a steady diet of liquid hush money. You wonder if you should have some, but you need your wits about you today. The machines don't care if you're sleepy. In fact, they seem to prefer it. A sleepy worker is a worker who forgets to pull their hand back in time. As you walk, the scale of the factory starts to loom over you. They are the new cathedrals of this age, massive, windowless brick boxes topped with chimneys that vomit black smoke into the sky 24 hours a day. You can feel the vibration of the steam engines in the soles of your feet before you even reach the gate. It's a deep, rhythmic thud that feels like the pulse of a giant. This is your destination. This is where you'll spend the next 14 to 16 hours. You take one last breath of the slightly less smoggy outside air, steeling yourself for the sensory assault that's about to begin. You aren't just a person anymore. You're an extension of the machinery. And the machinery is very hungry. As you step fully onto the street, the world immediately disappears. You aren't just walking through a bit of morning mist. You are wading through the infamous pea souper. It's a thick, yellowish-green sludge of air that feels less like a gas and more like a solid. If you think a bad Wi-Fi connection is frustrating because the world is buffering, imagine your actual vision buffering in real time. You can't see your own feet, let alone the person walking 2 paces in front of you. This isn't a weather event, it's an environmental catastrophe disguised as a Tuesday. It's a mixture of water vapor and the sulfurous output of 100,000 coal fires, all trapped under a low-hanging ceiling of cold air. It's basically a slow-motion car crash of chemistry and climate, and you're currently inhaling it. The smell is the first thing that really hits you, or rather, it assaults you. It's a pungent, suffocating cocktail of rotten eggs, charred toast, and the metallic tang of an old penny. It's the kind of smell that doesn't just sit in your nose, it settles in the back of your throat like an unwanted guest who refuses to leave. You try to breathe through your teeth, acting as a human filter, but all that does is give you a gritty coating of soot on your tongue. Modern air purifiers would probably just explode if they were introduced to this atmosphere. In fact, if you were to take a white handkerchief and hold it over your mouth for the duration of this walk, by the time you reach the factory gates, it would be a depressing shade of charcoal. It's like the city is trying to tattoo your lungs from the inside out. You trudge forward, feeling the slick, greasy texture of the cobblestones. The fog has a weird way of distorting sound, too. The clatter of clogs and the distant rattle of a carriage sound muffled and eerie, as if the world is wrapped in dirty cotton wool. You have to be careful where you step. People frequently walk straight into the canals or off the edge of docks because the fog is so disorienting. It's the 19th century equivalent of walking while staring at your phone, except the phone is a wall of toxic vapor, and the distraction is your own inability to breathe. To help people navigate, some entrepreneurial kids, known as link boys, carry burning torches and offer to guide people home or to work for a few pennies. They are basically the human version of a GPS, only they might also lead you into a dark alley and rob you if they're having a slow day. Historians still argue whether the extreme air pollution of the 19th century directly fueled the rise of the Gothic horror genre, providing the literal and metaphorical darkness that authors like Dickens and Stevenson used to terrify their readers. Looking around you now, it's easy to see why. The shapes of the buildings loom out of the yellow gloom like monsters, and every flickering gas lamp looks like a ghostly eye. It's hard to tell if that shadow moving towards you is a fellow worker or Jack the Ripper's less famous, equally grumpy cousin. The atmosphere is so thick that in 1873, a single particularly bad fog event in London was estimated to have killed over 700 people in just a few days, mostly from respiratory failure. It turns out that breathing spicy air is generally bad for your long-term health prospects. You notice that the London Ivy, a cheeky nickname people gave to the black soot that coated every building, is even thicker here in the industrial heart of the city. Everything is a monochromatic shade of depressed. Even the horses look soot-stained, their breath coming out in ragged plumes that merge with the smog. You pass a public fountain where the water is covered in a film of oily rainbow-colored residue. You're thirsty, but you know better. Or maybe you don't. After all, germ theory is still a fringe idea that most people think sounds like something out of a bad science fiction novel. To most of your peers, diseases are caused by miasma, literally just bad smells. And in this city, if bad smells caused cholera, everyone would be dead by noon. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that some Victorians actually believed the smoke was good for you. There was a segment of the population that argued the sulfur in the coal smoke acted as a disinfectant, killing off the seeds of disease in the air. It's the ultimate toxic positivity, literally. Imagine trying to convince yourself that your hacking cough is just your body's way of saying thanks for the medicine. It's about as effective as trying to cure a headache by hitting yourself with the hammer. You feel a tickle in your chest, a precursor to the Victorian hack that will eventually define your respiratory health. You try to swallow the phlegm, but it tastes like a chimney sweep's broom. As you get closer to the factory, the fog starts to glow with a dull, hellish red light. This is the reflection of the massive blast furnaces and steam engine boilers that are being stoked for the day shift. The temperature begins to rise, but it's not a comfortable warmth. It's a humid, oppressive heat that makes the smog feel even heavier. The transition from the freezing cold of your tenement to this sulfurous warmth is enough to make your head swim. You see the gatehouse up ahead, a dark silhouette against the fiery orange glow. The pea souper is left behind as you enter the black country of the factory interior. But the air in here isn't an improvement. It's just a different flavor of poison. You check the large clock mounted above the gate. You have exactly 3 minutes. Time in the Victorian era isn't the fluid, I'll be there in 5 minutes concept you're used to. It is a rigid, unforgiving master. Factories didn't just use clocks, they used timekeepers who were basically professional narcs. If you're not through that gate when the bell tolls, you're locked out. And if you're locked out, you don't get paid. For a worker living hand to mouth, being late for work isn't just an inconvenience. It's a difference between having dinner and watching your family eat their own shoelaces. The clatter of clogs on the pavement intensifies into a frantic rhythm as everyone pulls their shawls tighter and puts their heads down for the final sprint. You find yourself running, your boots slipping on the greasy cobwebs of soot and moisture. Your lungs are burning and every breath feels like you're swallowing a handful of sand. You make it through the gate just as the heavy iron bolt slides home with a definitive, bone-chilling thud. You're in. You've survived the commute, which is a victory in itself, but the prize is 14 hours of grueling labor in a room that smells like grease and despair. Welcome to the workday. It only gets worse from here. Standing just inside the gate, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird, you realize that the factory isn't just a building, it's a giant ticking organism that demands absolute synchronization. In your old life, you might have complained if your Uber was 3 minutes late or if your microwave took too long to pop corn. Here, time isn't a suggestion, it's a weapon. And the first person to wield that weapon against you this morning was the knocker-up. Remember that shadowy figure you saw through the fog on your way in? That was a professional human alarm clock. Since nobody can afford a personal timepiece, which costs about as much as a small house, the working class relies on these people to poke them into consciousness. The knocker-up carries a long bamboo pole reaching up to the second or third story to tap rhythmically on your window pane until you show your face. It's essentially a 19th century nudge notification, but much harder to ignore. Some of them, like the legendary Mary Smith, didn't even use a pole. They used a pea shooter to fire dried peas at your glass. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit of Victorian life to imagine a grandmotherly figure prowling the streets at 4 a.m., sniping window panes with legumes for a few pence a week. If you were hoping for a snooze button, your only option would be to hide under your thin blanket and hope they don't see you, but then you'd starve. It's a very binary system. Wake up or go hungry. As you walk toward the main floor, you pass the timekeeper's hut. He sits there with a massive ledger and a watch that he treats with more reverence than a holy relic. Historians still argue whether the imposition of clock time over the old, rhythmic, natural time of the countryside was a necessary step for industrial efficiency or a deliberate psychological tool used to break the spirit of the working class and turn them into human machines. Before the mills, you worked when the sun was up and stopped when it went down. Now, you work because a brass gear inside a box tells you to. The factory clock is a new local deity, and its priest is a grumpy man with a quill pen who is currently marking you down as present. You feel a sense of relief that you made it before the lockout. In many Victorian factories, if you were even a minute late, the gates were bolted. You'd be forced to stand outside in the freezing rain or smog for half a day, losing your wages while still being fined for your absence. It's the ultimate lose-lose scenario. The fines are a work of dark art. You can be fined for talking, for whistling, for leaving a window open, or for closing one. You might even be fined for having your hair too long or for not being at your station when the bell rings, even if you were just sharpening a tool. By the end of the week, many workers find that their already meager paycheck has been nibbled away by these petty penalties, leaving them with barely enough to buy a candle to see their way home. The sound of the factory bell begins to toll. It's a deep, brassy clang that vibrates in your teeth. This isn't the charming bell of a village church, it's a command. It's the start button for a machine that won't stop for another 14 hours. You follow the crowd toward the spinning room. The floor beneath your feet is made of heavy timber, soaked in decades of machine oil until it's as slick as an ice rink. The smell hits you again, but intensified. Hot metal, rancid whale oil used for lubrication, and the dry, ticklish scent of raw cotton fibers floating in the air like a localized blizzard. Mainstream history often notes that the Industrial Revolution was the engine of progress, but standing here, it feels more like an engine of exhaustion. You find your station. There are no ergonomic floor mats or standing desk converters. Here, you are standing on hard, vibrating wood. Your job is to monitor a mule, a massive spinning machine that stretches out and pulls back, twisting hundreds of threads at once. It's about the size of a city bus and twice as dangerous. You have to move with it, pacing back and forth, catching broken threads and piecing them back together with a flick of your fingers. It's a repetitive dance that you'll perform roughly 28,000 times today. The room is starting to heat up. The steam engines in the basement are pumping out massive amounts of energy, and the friction of thousands of whirling spindles creates a dry, static heat that makes your skin feel tight. You look at the clock on the far wall. It's 6:05 a.m. You have been awake for 2 hours, and you've only just started the first of 14 hours of labor. You think about your modern life, where hard work might mean sitting through a particularly long Zoom meeting where everyone's audio is lagging. Here, lagging means your hand didn't move fast enough and the machine just reclaimed a finger. The social hierarchy of the factory is visible even in how people track time. The overlooker or floor manager walks around with a pocket watch, ostentatiously checking it every few minutes to make sure no one is slacking. He is the personification of the deadline. If he catches you leaning against a post to rest your aching back, he won't give you a performance review. He'll give you a strap, a heavy leather belt that serves as the Victorian version of a HR warning. It's a brutal physical environment where the pressure to perform is constant. You find yourself watching the minute hand of the clock, but it seems to move through molasses. There's a strange, almost hypnotic quality to the movement of the machinery. The rhythmic thump hiss of the steam pistons and the whir of the bobbins create a wall of sound that makes conversation impossible. This is why factory whistle language and hand signals became so common. You learn to read the lips of your coworkers and interpret the frantic waving of a hand to mean the belt is slipping or the boss is coming. It's a secret language born of necessity in a world where your ears are essentially useless. You look down at your hands, they're already covered in a fine layer of white cotton dust, making you look like a ghost. This dust is the cotton lung in its early stages. You cough, and a small cloud of white fluff escapes your lips. It's a quirky, terrifying fact that workers in these mills would often have so much cotton in their systems that their digestive tracts would get blocked, a condition known as fluff fever. It's like being a human teddy bear, but inside out and significantly more lethal. You take a sip of water from a communal tin cup that tastes like iron and rust, trying to wash the fibers down. As the sun, what little of it can penetrate the smog, begins to hit the high, grime-streaked windows, the factory takes on a cathedral-like appearance. Dust motes dance in the shafts of light, looking almost peaceful if you ignore the fact that they're basically tiny shards of glass for your lungs. You realize that your entire existence is now measured in hanks of yarn and quarters of an hour. The knocker-up got you here, the gatekeeper recorded you, and now the clock owns you. You are a cog in a machine that doesn't believe in rest, and the day has only just begun. The moment you step onto the main floor of the weaving shed, the air doesn't just hit you, it punches you. If you thought the pea super outside was bad, welcome to the internal combustion engine's angry older brother. The noise isn't just a sound, it's a physical entity that occupies every cubic inch of space. Imagine standing inside a giant metal drum while 1,000 angry giants play a drum solo with sledgehammers. This is the roar of the power looms. In your modern life, you might put on noise-canceling headphones because someone is eating chips too loudly 3 desks away. Here, noise cancellation is just a dream you haven't had yet because you're too tired to dream. Your only option for quiet is to wait for the heat death of the universe or for the steam engine to explode, whichever comes first. The vibration is what really catches you off guard. It starts in your clogs, travels up through your shins, and settles in your teeth. Everything is shaking. The floorboards, the cast iron pillars, even the air itself seems to be shivering. It's like being at a heavy metal concert where the bass is turned up so high it might actually liquefy your internal organs. Except there's no encore and the concert lasts 14 hours. Historians still argue whether this constant low-frequency vibration caused a specific type of industrial shell shock among workers, a precursor to the urban stress we talk about today. You feel like a tuning fork that's been struck and then forgotten. This is the era of the power loom, a marvel of engineering perfected by men like Edmund Cartwright, which effectively turned the slow rhythmic art of hand weaving into a frantic mechanical race. It's a mainstream historical fact that these machines revolutionized the global economy, making cloth cheaper than it had ever been in human history, but they didn't make it quietly. Each loom has a heavy wooden shuttle that is fired across the warp at high speeds, hitting the side with a bone-jarring clack thud. Now, multiply that by 500 looms in a single room. It's not a rhythm, it's a chaotic wall of percussion that makes your brain feel like it's being lightly tenderized by a kitchen mallet. You try to say something to the person at the next station, but you can't even hear your own thoughts, let alone your voice. Communication here is done through a complex system of meemawing, a type of lip reading combined with exaggerated facial expressions. It's like everyone is participating in a very high stakes, very grimy game of charades. If you don't learn to meemaw, you're essentially in solitary confinement in the middle of a crowd. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that many factory workers became so proficient at lip reading that they could carry on full conversations across a deafening room without making a single sound. They'd even use it outside the factory, gossip mongering in the streets while the posh folk wondered why. These poor people were just staring and mouthing at each other like fish in a tank. But there's a darker side to the mechanics of the loom. To keep the thread moving, you have to perform a task known as kissing the shuttle. When the bobbin runs out, you replace it and then put your mouth to a small hole in the shuttle, sucking the thread through to the other side. It's quick, it's efficient, and it's a biological disaster, since hundreds of people are kissing the same shuttles. And since the air is thick with cotton dust and the spit of 1,000 coughing workers, the loom becomes a high-speed delivery system for tuberculosis and other respiratory nightmares. It's the ultimate forbidden kiss. You're literally inhaling the DNA of your sickest coworkers just to keep the machine running. If you complained about this to the overlooker, he'd probably tell you that your lungs are a private matter and to get back to work before he fines you for being excessively chatty with the equipment. The physical toll of standing on this vibrating floor is starting to manifest as mill fever. Your head throbbed when you woke up, but now it feels like there's a pressurized steam valve behind your eyes. You're surrounded by moving parts. Leather belts whirring overhead like giant hungry snakes, gears gnashing their teeth just inches from your elbows. There are no safety guards. Safety guards are expensive and slow, and in 1845, your life is significantly cheaper than a piece of molded iron. If your shawl gets caught in a drive belt, you aren't going to have a workplace incident report filed. You're just going to become part of the decor. You notice a girl a few stations down who looks about 12. She's leaning into the loom, her fingers moving with a terrifying practice speed. This is industrial ASMR, but without the relaxing tingles, just the constant threat of a crushed finger. The sheer scale of the machinery makes you feel small, not just in size, but in value. You are a hand, a term used quite literally. The factory doesn't want your brain, your soul, or your personality. It just wants the two things at the ends of your arms to keep moving in sync with the pistons. It's a modern comparison, but you're basically a biological peripheral, a mouse and keyboard for a machine that runs on coal and misery. The heat in the weaving shed is different from the spinning room. It's a wet heat. To keep the cotton threads from snapping under the tension of the high-speed looms, the air has to be kept humid. Steam is piped into the room, mixing with the sweat of hundreds of bodies. Your clothes, that itchy wool you put on this morning, are now damp and heavy, clinging to your skin like a cold, wet blanket that's somehow also boiling hot. The windows are kept tightly shut to keep the humidity in, meaning there is zero ventilation. You are breathing in a soup of steam, oil mist, and cotton fluff that coats your throat in a layer of grime. It's like living inside a giant dirty humidifier that's broken and set to suffocate. You look at your hands. The grease from the machines has mixed with the cotton dust to form a black, waxy paste under your fingernails. You try to wipe it off on your apron, but the apron is already a map of industrial stains. You realize that you've been standing in the same 2-foot square of space for 4 hours now. Your knees feel like they've been replaced with rusted hinges. You'd give anything to sit down, but there are no chairs. Sitting is seen as a sign of moral decay by the factory owners. If you're sitting, you aren't producing, and if you aren't producing, you're practically stealing from the man who so graciously allows you to work yourself to death in his shed. The roar continues, a relentless oceanic sound that drowns out the very concept of silence. You start to lose track of time. Is it 10 a.m.? Is it noon? The clock on the wall is obscured by a cloud of steam. You just keep moving. Reach, piece, tuck, kiss the shuttle. Repeat. The machine doesn't get tired, so you aren't allowed to either. You are part of the power loom now, a small fleshy gear in a system that is currently reshaping the world, one deafening clack at a time. And as the vibration rattles your bones, you wonder if you'll ever truly hear silence again, or if the mill deafness is already beginning to set in, muffled and gray like the fog you left behind this morning. You feel a sudden tug at your apron, but it's not the machinery this time. It's a small, dirt-streaked face looking up at you from floor level. A child who can't be older than 7. He doesn't say a word. He just darts under your vibrating loom while it's still in full motion. This is a scavenger, and in the hierarchy of the Victorian factory, he is at the very bottom, literally and figuratively. While you are busy monitoring the threads above, his job is to crawl through the grease and the moving parts to collect the loose fluff and cotton waste that falls beneath the frames. It's a mainstream historical fact that child labor was the backbone of the early industrial era, but seeing it up close makes your 21st century stomach do a slow, nauseous flip. The scavenger has to move with the precision of a clockwork gear. If he stays under the machine for 1 second too long, the heavy carriage of the mule will sweep back and crush his skull or snap his spine. It's a high-stakes game of the floor is lava. Only the lava is made of cast iron and weighs 2 tons. You watch him disappear into the shadows beneath the whirling spindles, his tiny hands darting out to grab clumps of white fiber. To him, this isn't a tragedy, it's just Tuesday. He is likely a parish apprentice, an orphan apprenticed to the mill owner in exchange for a bed in a cramped dormitory and enough gruel to keep his heart beating. It's essentially a legal form of child slavery, wrapped in the polite language of vocational training. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about these children that reveals the casual cruelty of the age. Many of them were so accustomed to the rhythmic movement of the machines that they would continue to perform the scavenging motion in their sleep. Imagine a room full of 30 exhausted children, all twitching and reaching out in the dark to grab imaginary cotton. It's a haunting image that sounds like something out of a horror movie, but for them, it was just muscle memory. Their bodies were being shaped, literally warped by their labor. Historians still argue whether the physical deformities common in mill hands, such as knocked knees and curved spines, were primarily due to the repetitive nature of the work or the chronic lack of vitamin D and calcium in their diets. Either way, these children are growing up into the shape of the machines they serve. You see the piecer next to you, usually a slightly older child, maybe 10 or 11. Her job is to run back and forth along the spinning frame, leaning over the moving parts to join broken threads together. She does this while the machine is moving at top speed. Her fingers are a blur of motion, calloused and stained with oil. If she's too slow, the overlooker is standing by with a billy roller, a heavy wooden rod, to give her a reminder to pick up the pace. It's a modern comparison, but this is the ultimate high-pressure environment where the KPIs are measured in human skin, and the performance review is a literal beating. You want to reach out and help her, but you have your own station to manage, and the rules are clear. No interference. The air down where the scavengers work is even worse than the air you're breathing. It's a concentrated soup of floor dust, stagnant oil, and the night soil that sometimes leaks into the factory basement. These kids are the canaries in the coal mine, but nobody is checking to see if they were still singing. In fact, many factory owners argue that children were uniquely suited for this work because of their small stature and nimble fingers. It's a classic bit of Victorian corporate spin, turning a human rights violation into a specialized skill set. You watch the boy scramble out from under your loom just as the carriage thunders back into place. He wipes a streak of black grease across his forehead, leaving a dark smudge that looks like a war paint of the impoverished. You notice that he's barefoot. Most of the children are. This isn't just because shoes are expensive, it's because bare feet give them better grip on the oil-slicked floors. Of course, it also means their toes are vulnerable to being pinched by gears or pierced by the sharp wooden splinters that break off the floorboards. If a child loses a finger, they aren't sent to a school nurse. They're often just sent home for the day, or worse, told to wrap it in a greasy rag and get on with it. There is no workers' comp. Your compensation for being mangled by a machine is usually the privilege of being fired because you are no longer efficient. There's a strange, grim camaraderie among these children. You see them sharing a joke, or at least a me-mod version of one, during a rare 3-second lull in the action. They have their own slang and their own ways of subverting the overlooker's authority. Sometimes they'll deliberately jam a machine with a piece of wood just to get a 5-minute break while the engineer fixes it. It's a dangerous game. If they're caught, the punishment is severe. But when you're 7 years old and you've been standing for 8 hours, 5 minutes of broken machine feels like a week at a luxury spa. It's a small, desperate act of rebellion in a world that treats them as disposable parts. The sensory details of their existence are overwhelming. The smell of the children is a mix of sour milk, unwashed hair, and the metallic tang of the machines. Their clothes are hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs, held together by hope and grime. You think about the back-to-school commercials of your own time. The shiny backpacks, the new sneakers, the smell of fresh crayons. Here, the school supply is a bucket of grease and a heavy leather strap. Some factories did offer Sunday schools, but after a 70-hour work week, most of these children were too exhausted to learn how to read. The cat sat on the mat, let alone contemplate the theological complexities the mill owners wanted to instill in them. As the morning wears on, you see the scavenger boy start to flag. His movements are becoming sluggish, his timing a fraction of a second off. This is the danger zone. Most factory accidents don't happen in the first hour. They happen when the industrial fatigue sets in and the brain starts to flicker like a dying candle. You try to keep an eye on him, a silent guardian in a world of loud steel. You realize that your survival in this era isn't just about your own luck, it's about the collective endurance of the people around you. If he fails, the machine might jam and explode, taking you with it. The scavenger disappears under another machine, a shadow among shadows. You look at the clock again. It's only 11:30 a.m. The lunch break is still 30 minutes away. But for these children, lunch is often just more of the same. Eating a dry crust of bread while sitting on the floor they just cleaned, surrounded by the roar that never stops. You feel a deep, burning anger at the unfairness of it all, but you have to push it down. Anger takes energy, and energy is a currency you can't afford to waste. You piece another thread together, your fingers mimicking the frantic dance of the children as the industrial machine continues to chew through the daylight and the lives of the smallest workers in the room. Finally, the great steam whistle lets out a shriek that pierces through even the oceanic roar of the looms. This is the signal for the midday break. The 1 hour in your 16-hour marathon where the machines stop their hungry vibration and allow you to remember you're a human being. The silence that follows is almost as painful as the noise. It's a sudden, heavy vacuum that makes your ears ring with a high-pitched whine. You stand there for a moment, swaying on your feet, waiting for the world to stop tilting. Your knees are locked in a permanent semi-crouch, and your back feels like it's been welded into a question mark. It's time for lunch, but don't get your hopes up. There's no catered break room with a bean to cup coffee machine or a selection of salads. You find a relatively dry patch of floor or a greasy windowsill to perch on. You reach into your pocket and pull out the meal you brought from the tenement, a hunk of gray bread and perhaps a small piece of cheese if it's early in the week. In the 21st century, you might worry about gluten or whether your kale is organic. In the Victorian era, you're mostly worried about whether your bread contains more sawdust than flour. It's a mainstream historical fact that food adulteration was a rampant, terrifying reality for the urban poor. To maximize profits, bakers would often bulk out their dough with alum, chalk, or even finely ground bone meal. It made the bread look whiter and heavier, but it also turned your digestive tract into a concrete mixer. You take a bite, and it's gritty. That's either the chalk or the soot that has settled on your food since you took it out of your pocket. To wash it down, you might have a small flask of beer. Now, this isn't a craft IPA or a refreshing lager. It's small beer, a weak, murky liquid that is often safer to drink than the water from the communal pump, simply because the brewing process kills off some of the more immediate instant death bacteria. However, even the beer isn't safe from the edible experiment of Victorian commerce. Publicans were known to add Cocculus indicus, a toxic berry, to give the beer an artificial kick, or even strychnine in tiny doses to mimic the bitter taste of hops. Historians still argue whether the chronic, low-level poisoning from adulterated food contributed more to the short life expectancy of factory workers than the actual working conditions themselves. You're essentially eating a slow-acting chemistry set every single day. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit regarding Victorian lunch culture in the mills, the piecer's snack. Because children were often too busy to stop, they would eat while they worked, their bread becoming coated in a thick layer of cotton fluff and machine grease. They called it tasty because the grease added a bit of flavor to the dry crust. It's a kind of dark humor you develop when your other option is starving. You see the scavenger boy from earlier sitting near a pile of waste, chewing on something that looks like a piece of leather. He doesn't look at you, he just stares at the stationary gears of the loom with a 1,000-yard stare that belongs on a war veteran, not a 7-year-old. If you're lucky, a coster might be waiting outside the factory gate selling hot pea soup or pickled whelks. But even this street food is a gamble. The soup is often just green-tinted water thickened with more of that ubiquitous alum, and the whelks might have been sitting in that jar since the reign of King George. You think back to your modern world, where a bad lunch means the avocado was a bit too brown or the sandwich was soggy. Here, a bad lunch can lead to a week of the flux, the Victorian polite term for dysentery, which, in a world without rehydration salts, is often a death sentence. You chew your chalk bread slowly, trying to find a part of it that doesn't taste like a mineral deposit. The air in the factory during the break doesn't improve. Without the machines running to circulate the air, the miasma just settles. The smell of unwashed bodies becomes more pronounced, mixing with the cooling oil and the dampness of the walls. You look at your coworkers. Without the frantic motion of the work, they look like ghosts caught in the middle of a haunting. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes sunken into dark hollows. Many have the blue line on their gums, a sign of lead poisoning from the pipes or the paint. It's a modern comparison, but the factory is like a giant battery, and you are the acid that's slowly being consumed to keep the light on. You try to rest your eyes, but the overlooker is already pacing the floor again. Even during the break, the discipline doesn't entirely relax. If you're caught sleeping too deeply, you might get a kick to the ribs to keep your spirits up. There's no nap pod or mindfulness corner here. You spend your precious 45 minutes of remaining time just trying to stop your hands from shaking. The repetitive motion of piecing threads creates a nervous tick. Even now, your fingers are twitching in your lap, miming the tuck and flick of the silk. As the hour draws to a close, the engineer begins to stoke the boilers again. You can hear the distant low-frequency rumble as the steam pressure builds. It's the sound of the world coming back to life, and it's a sound you've come to dread. You take one last sip of your strychnine light beer and stand up. Your legs protest with a sharp stabbing pain in the calves, the mill cramp. You realize that you haven't really rested at all. You've just stopped moving long enough for your muscles to realize how much they hurt. The whistle blows again. It's a shorter, sharper blast this time. The back to your stations warning. You see the children scrambling back under the machines, their small bodies disappearing into the darkness. You return to your loom. The lunch is over, and the second half of the day, the dark hours, is about to begin. You feel the first vibration as the overhead drive shafts begin to rotate, the leather belt snapping into tension like whips. The roar returns, and with it, the chalk bread in your stomach feels like a heavy, cold stone. You've survived the morning, but the afternoon in a Victorian factory is where the real industrial attrition happens. When the fatigue makes the gears look like friends and the moving belts look like a place to rest your head. The machines don't care that you've just eaten a lunch made of chalk and despair. As the steam pressure peaks, the overhead shafts begin to rotate with a low, menacing growl that builds into a scream. This is the moment where the afternoon slump becomes a lethal liability. In your modern life, hitting a wall at 2:00 p.m. means you might accidentally send an email with a typo or browse for desk plans for 20 minutes. Here, hitting the wall means your reaction time slows by half a second, which is exactly how long it takes for a drive belt to turn you into a cautionary tale. You are now entering the most dangerous part of the day, the hours where fatigue meets the total absence of safety standards. Look up at the ceiling. It's a forest of spinning iron and leather. Thick, tanned hide belts, some 6 inches wide, snake down from the main drive shafts to every single loom and spinning frame on the floor. These belts are moving at terrifying speeds, and they aren't behind glass or tucked inside a sleek plastic casing. They are just there, whirring inches from your head, creating a constant, static charge breeze that makes the hair on your arms stand up. If a belt snaps, and they do frequently, it doesn't just fall, It whips through the air with enough force to decapitate a person or shatter a cast iron pillar. It's like working inside a giant high-speed clock where someone forgot to put the back cover on. It is a mainstream historical fact that for much of the Victorian era, factory owners viewed safety guards as a frivolous expense that impeded the natural flow of labor. They'll argue that if a worker was careful and sober, they had nothing to fear. It's a 19th century version of it's not a bug, it's a feature. There were no yellow caution stripes, no emergency stop buttons, and certainly no OSHA inspectors with clipboards and a sense of moral duty. If you wanted to stop your machine, you had to manually disengage a heavy iron lever that often sparked and kicked back like a mule. In many cases, the only way to stop the entire floor was for the engineer in the basement to shut down the steam engine, a process that took several minutes, far too long to help anyone currently being integrated into the gears. You watch an oiler move through the room. This is one of the most terrifying jobs in the mill. He carries a long-necked tin of whale oil and a ladder. His task is to climb up into the rafters to lubricate the bearings of the main drive shafts while they're still spinning at full speed. He's balancing on a greasy rung, inches away from a shaft rotating at 100 RPM, poking a metal nozzle into a tiny hole. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that these oilers were often chosen for their lack of nerves, though most people just called it a death wish. If his sleeve catches on a protruding bolt, he'll be whirled around the shaft like a rag doll until the engine stops or his body breaks the machine. It's extreme sports without the Red Bull sponsorship or the safety net. Historians still argue whether the high rate of industrial accidents was a deliberate byproduct of capitalist greed, or if it was simply a cultural blind spot in an age where life was viewed as inherently cheap and risky. Some suggest that the owners truly believed that danger was a motivator for efficiency, while others point to the slowly evolving legal system that began to favor workers only after decades of horrific testimony. From your perspective, as you dodge a spray of hot grease from a nearby gear, the academic nuance doesn't matter much. What matters is the nip, that sudden, sharp tug on your clothing that tells you the machine has noticed you. You've learned to pin your hair back tightly, almost painfully so. If a single stray lock of hair gets caught in the spinning throttle frames, it can scalp a person in a heartbeat. You see women on the floor with jagged scars along their hairlines. The Victorian haircut no one asked for. You also have to be mindful of your skirt or your apron. If the hem gets caught in the beating up mechanism of the loom, you're going to be pulled into the machinery faster than you can scream. It's a modern comparison, but navigating this floor is like playing a 14-hour game of Don't Touch the Lava, except the lava is made of serrated steel and is actively trying to grab you. The lighting doesn't help. As the afternoon wanes and the soot-caked windows grow dim, the factory transitions to gaslight. The bat's wing burners flicker and hiss, casting long, jittery shadows that make the moving parts look like they're shifting and lunging. The air grows even thicker with the smell of unburnt gas and the scorched scent of oil hitting hot metal. Your eyes are stinging and the constant flickering makes it hard to judge distances. Is that gear 6 inches away or 2? You blink, trying to clear the mill grease from your vision, but it's like trying to wipe away a fog. There's a specific sound you learn to fear, the clatter thud of a gear tooth breaking. When a cast iron gear shears under the pressure, the shards fly out like shrapnel. It's a quirky, terrifying reality that many workers carried small pieces of iron embedded in their skin for years. industrial shrapnel that served as a permanent souvenir of their time on the floor. You see a man a few stations over with a jagged scar across his cheek, the result of a flying shuttle that escaped its track and struck him like a wooden bullet. He didn't get a day off. He just stuffed some raw cotton into the wound to stop the bleeding and kept weaving. You find yourself moving in a rhythmic defensive crouch. You piece a thread, step back, check the belt, check the gear, repeat. It's a safety dance born of pure survival instinct. Your mind is wandering to the world you left behind, a world of ergonomic assessments and safety first posters. Here, the only safety poster is the person in the next row with 3 missing fingers, a silent reminder of what happens when the machine wins. You realize that bravery in this era isn't about doing something heroic, it's just about having the sheer, dogged endurance to keep your limbs attached to your torso until the sun goes down. As the clock ticks toward 4 p.m., the fatigue is a physical weight on your shoulders. Your peripheral vision is blurring, which is exactly when the machines are most dangerous. You think about that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in another life. It was gross, sure, but it didn't try to eat your arm. The Victorian factory is a predator that never sleeps, never eats, and never feels pity. It just waits for you to blink. You take a deep breath of the gas-scented air, stealing your nerves for the final hours of the shift. You aren't just a worker anymore. You are a survivor in a high-speed, iron-jawed wilderness. If you thought the greatest threat to your survival was a rogue leather belt or a flying wooden shuttle, you were only looking at the visible monsters. As the afternoon gaslight begins to hiss, casting that sickly green hue over the factory floor, you start to notice the silent killers. The ones you can't see, but you can certainly smell. You're no longer just worried about losing a finger. You're worried about your bones literally dissolving while you're still using them. In your 21st century life, you probably check the back of your shampoo bottle for sulfates and get concerned if your all-natural cleaning spray smells a bit too much like a laboratory. Here, the workplace fragrance is a potent mix of sulfur, lead, and arsenic, and the safety equipment is, well, it's mostly just your ability to hold your breath and hope for the best. Let's talk about the dippers in the match factories, because if you think the textile mill is a nightmare, the match industry is a literal descent into a chemical purgatory. Your job might involve dipping thousands of wooden splints into a warm, gooey vat of white phosphorus. It's a mainstream historical fact that white phosphorus was the key ingredient in strike anywhere matches, the revolutionary tech of the 1840s that allowed people to create fire without a flint and steel. But for you, the worker, that phosphorus is a slow-acting poison. As you lean over the vat, the fumes rise up in a shimmering, ghostly vapor. It smells like garlic, vile, concentrated industrial garlic. You inhale it for 12 hours a day, and it begins to settle in your gums and your jawbone. In a few months, you might notice a persistent toothache. In your world, a toothache means a trip to a dentist who offers you a choice of local anesthetic and maybe a pair of sunglasses to block the bright light. In the Victorian era, a toothache is the opening act of a tragedy. Medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. And for a match worker, that ache is the start of phossy jaw, or phosphorus necrosis. The chemicals are literally eating away at your mandible. It starts with an abscess, then the bone begins to die and rot. A quirky, fringe tidbit that sounds like a campfire ghost story. In the dark of your tenement at night, your breath might actually glow a faint greenish white. Your coworkers might even see your jaw shimmering through the skin. It's the ultimate toxic glow up, a biological nightlight that signals your body is being hollowed out from within. Historians still argue whether the eventual ban on white phosphorus was driven more by the heroic Match Girls strike of 1888, where teenage girls stood up to the titans of industry, or if it was simply a matter of the more expensive, safer red phosphorus becoming economically viable enough for the owners to care. Regardless of the academic debate, for you, standing at the vat in 1850, the only labor law is the one that says if you're too sick to work, you're too poor to eat. You see women with their lower jaws wrapped in heavy bandages, trying to hide the fact that their bones are weeping foul-smelling pus, because if the overlooker sees how advanced the Fosse is, he'll fire them on the spot to avoid the miasma of their decay. But phosphorus isn't the only chemical ghost in the machine. Look at the fabric you're weaving. To get those vibrant, fashionable colors, the deep purples and the brilliant Chiles green, the textile industry relies on a heavy dose of arsenic and lead. It's a modern comparison, but wearing a Victorian high fashion dress was essentially like wearing a wearable hazard waste site. As a worker, you're the one handling the raw dyes. Your hands are stained a permanent, toxic emerald green. The dust from the dyed threads enters your pores and your lungs, leading to skin ulcers, hair loss, and a chronic metallic taste in your mouth that no amount of small beer can wash away. You're literally becoming part of the color palette of the 19th century, sacrificing your nervous system so a lady in a manor house can look to die for at a ball. Even the air in the factory feels heavy, doesn't it? That's a lead. It's in the paint on the walls, it's in the pipes, and it's in the solder of the machinery. Lead poisoning, or plumbism, is so common it's almost considered a standard part of aging for a factory hand. It makes your joints ache, it makes your temper short, and it clouds your mind with a brain fog that no amount of 21st century wellness shots could ever penetrate. You find yourself forgetting simple tasks, or your hands might start to drop. A condition called wrist drop, where the lead has damaged your nerves so badly you can't even lift your palm. Imagine trying to piece a thread when your hand feels like a lead weight at the end of your arm. It's not just burnout, it's biological sabotage. There's a strange, grim sarcasm in how the workers talk about these poisons. They call the Fosse jaw the matchmaker's kiss. They joke that the arsenic-dyed green thread is the grass that never withers. It's a way to cope with the fact that you are being slowly consumed by the very materials you produce. You look at the oiler from earlier, who is now covered in a film of rancid whale oil and lead dust. He looks like a bronze statue shimmering in the gaslight, but you know that beneath that sheen, his organs are struggling. The factory is a giant stomach, and it's currently digesting you with a cocktail of acids and minerals that the human body was never meant to encounter in such concentration. The physical sensation of this chemical assault is a constant, low-level nausea. Your stomach feels like it's full of hot coals, and your skin is perpetually itchy. A chemical itch that feels like ants crawling under your epidermis. You reach for a tin of ointment you bought from a street peddler, likely made of lard and more lead to soothe the sores on your arms, but it only makes them sting more. Everything in this world is a double-edged sword. The medicine is poison, the food is chalk, and the work is a slow motion execution. As the afternoon light fades completely, leaving only the flickering, sulfurous gas jets, the factory takes on an even more surreal quality. The colors of the threads look more vibrant, more lethal. The shield's green looms seem to glow with a malevolent energy. You realize that surviving isn't just about avoiding the gears, it's about outrunning your own biology. Your body is trying to reject the environment, but you have nowhere else to go. You piece another thread of arsenic-soaked silk. Your fingers stain that beautiful, deadly emerald, and you wonder if the glow has started in your own breath yet. You take a shallow breath, trying to minimize the intake of garlic-scented vapor, but the machine demands its tribute, and today, that tribute is being paid in bone and marrow. You're still reeling from the idea of your own breath glowing in the dark, but as the clock creeps toward the late afternoon, your body starts to remind you of a much more basic human problem. You need to use the facilities. In your modern life, this involves a short walk down a carpeted hallway to a room with porcelain fixtures, pressurized water, and perhaps a lavender-scented reed diffuser. Here, the facilities are a concept that hasn't quite been invented yet. In the Victorian factory, biological needs are treated as a personal failing, an inconvenient interruption to the machine's productivity. You realize that your survival isn't just being threatened by the gears or the arsenic, it's being threatened by the very air you're forced to share with 500 other people and their unmanaged waste. You ask a coworker where to go and they point toward a dark, damp corner of the room behind a thin, oil-stained wooden partition. As you approach, the smell hits you like a physical barrier. It's not just unpleasant, it's a thick, ammonia-heavy stench that makes your eyes water and your throat constrict. This is the communal privy. It's essentially a wooden plank with a hole cut in it, suspended over a bucket, or if the factory is modern, a brick-lined pit that hasn't been emptied since the Crimean War. There is no toilet paper, there are only handfuls of cotton waste, the fluff you've been cleaning off the machines, which is abrasive, greasy, and probably covered in the same arsenic dyes we talked about earlier. It's the ultimate no-frills experience, where the frills are replaced by the very real possibility of contracting a disease just by standing in the vicinity. It is a mainstream historical fact that the mid-19th century was the era of the Great Stink, a period when urban sanitation lagged so far behind industrial growth that cities like London and Manchester became literal open sewers. In the factory, this meant that drainage was an afterthought. The privies often overflowed into the same basements where the children worked or where the raw materials were stored. There was no concept of hand washing. If you were lucky, there might be a bucket of stagnant water with a layer of oily film on top. Most workers didn't bother. You go back to your loom with your hands, the same hands you used to piece threads and eat your chalk bread, carrying a microscopic cocktail of Victorian pathogens. It's a modern comparison, but your hands are currently a high-speed transit system for every bacteria known to 1850. Here's a quirky, fringe tidbit that might make you grateful for your modern tax bill. Urine was actually a valuable industrial commodity. In many textile-heavy areas, workers were encouraged to contribute to a communal vat of lant, aged urine. Because of its high ammonia content, it was used to scour grease from raw wool or as a mordant to help dyes stick to fabric. Historians have found records of paupers' income, where families would sell their own waste to the local mills. So, While you're standing there trying to breathe through your teeth, remember that the very fabric you're weaving might have been washed in the liquid gold of your neighbor's bladders. It's recycling Victorian style, which is to say it's efficient, resourceful, and absolutely stomach turning. Historians still argue whether the Great Stink of 1858, when the smell of the Thames became so bad that Parliament had to soak their curtains in chloride of lime to endure the sessions, was the primary catalyst for the massive sewage overhauls that followed, or if it was the mounting scientific evidence that finally broke the miasma theory. At the time you're working, the miasma theory is king. Everyone, including the factory doctor, believes that diseases like cholera and typhoid are spread by bad air or foul smells. It sounds logical, after all. The place smells like a nightmare, but it's a lethal misunderstanding. Because they think the smell is the enemy, they focus on masking it with perfume or vinegar rather than fixing the water supply. You're currently living in a world where the cure for a plague is basically a 19th century version of Febreze. The floor around the privy area is permanently slick with a mixture of moisture and other things. You have to be careful not to slip, because a fall here isn't just embarrassing, it's a biological hazard. You see the scavenger boy from earlier darting past the partition. He doesn't even look twice at the filth. For him, this is the only world he's ever known. His immune system is fighting a world-class war every single second, and he's probably losing. You start to feel a low, dull ache in your stomach, not from the chalk bread this time, but from the realization that you are surrounded by invisible monsters that your era doesn't even have a name for yet. You look at the communal water pail near the center of the floor. It's a wooden bucket with a single tin dipper that everyone shares. You watched a man with a hacking cough drink from it 10 minutes ago, followed by a woman whose hands were covered in machine grease. You're thirsty. The heat and the dust have turned your throat into a desert, but the water in that bucket looks like it was collected from a rain puddle in a stable. This is the paradox of the Victorian factory. You are surrounded by the peak of human engineering, by steam engines that can move mountains and looms that can weave miles of silk, yet you can't even get a clean glass of water. It's like living in a sci-fi movie where the spaceships run on coal and the crew dies of dysentery. The sensory details of this foul reality begin to weigh on you. It's not just the smell, it's the humidity. The steam from the machines and the sweat from the workers trap the odors, creating a warm, damp environment that acts like a greenhouse for bacteria. Your clothes, already damp from the wet heat of the weaving shed, now feel like they're absorbing the environment. You feel sticky in a way that a shower might never fix. You think about your modern life where a bad smell in the office is someone reheating fish in the microwave. Here, the office smell is the collective output of 500 people living in the middle of a sanitation crisis. There's a certain grim irony in the cleanliness of the factory owners. They often built massive grand houses on the outskirts of the city, far away from the miasma of their own mills. They'd come in for an hour, hold a scented handkerchief to their nose, and complain that the workers looked unwashed and demoralized. It's the ultimate tone-deaf leadership. You see the overlooker walking past the privy area, his face twisted in disgust, as if the lack of plumbing is your fault and not a deliberate design choice to save on construction costs. As you walk back to your station, your clogs clicking on the greasy floor, you realize that your survival isn't just about your reflexes, it's about your gut. In a few days, you might start feeling the Victorian grip, a sudden, sharp cramping that signals your body has finally surrendered to the pathogens in the water or the air. Without antibiotics or even the basic knowledge that you should boil your water, you're just a ticking clock of infection. You take your place at the loom, the roar of the machines returning to drown out the sound of your own heartbeat, and you try to focus on the threads. But the smell follows you, a persistent, pungent reminder that in the 1850s, the engine of progress was fueled by a lot more than just coal. It was built on a foundation of filth that you are currently standing in. The sun has likely set by now, though in this windowless forest of brick and soot, the concept of outside has become a distant, theoretical memory. The gaslights are no longer just flickering highlights. They are your entire world, casting long, jittery shadows that dance across the spinning mules like ghosts. You look at the clock and your heart sinks into your oil-stained clogs. It's only 7 p.m. You've been on your feet for nearly 15 hours and the night shift transition is still a blurred horizon away. In your 21st century life, a long day might involve staying at the office until 6:30 because a project is due, followed by a venti latte and a heavy sigh. Here, a long day is simply a day. There is no overtime pay, no comp time, and definitely no mental health days. There is only the relentless, rhythmic thud of the steam engine, which seems to be getting louder the more tired you become. Your body has entered a state of industrial fugue. Your muscles have moved past the stage of simple aching and into a strange, buzzing numbness. Your knees feel like they have been filled with hot sand, and every time you reach to piece a broken thread, your arm feels like it's being pulled through water. This is the endurance stage of the Victorian worker's survival guide. It's a mainstream historical fact that before the Factory Act of 1847, famously known as the 10 Hours Act, shifts of 14 to 16 hours were the standard. And even after the act, many owners found creative legal loopholes to keep their machines running around the clock. The act primarily protected women and children, leaving the men to continue as the iron horses of the empire, often working 18-hour stretches during peak seasons. You are currently a biological battery being drained to its very last volt. You find yourself doing what the old-timers call the walking sleep. Your eyes are open, your hands are moving with a practiced mechanical grace, but your brain has essentially checked out and gone to a quiet beach in Cornwall. You're navigating the floor by muscle memory alone. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that factory workers became so accustomed to the roar and the rhythm that they could actually fall into a light micro sleep while standing up, their bodies continuing the repetitive motions of the work. Of course, this is when the nip of the machine is most likely to find you. You've seen workers whose heads slumped forward for just a second, only to be jolted awake by the overlooker's strap, or worse, the sound of their own sleeve being caught in a spindle. It's the ultimate high-stakes power nap. Historians still argue whether the factory discipline of this era was a radical, traumatic break from the traditional rhythms of agricultural life, or if it was simply a more mechanical, urban version of the back-breaking labor humans had endured for centuries. Some scholars suggest that the transition to clock time was the greatest psychological shock of the 19th century, turning a population of rhythmic workers into linear producers. From where you're standing, leaning against a vibrating pillar for a forbidden 3-second rest, it feels like a soul-crushing heist. The factory hasn't just stolen your labor, it's stolen your sense of time. Morning, afternoon, and evening have been replaced by the first 6 hours, the middle shift, and the dark endurance. The sensory details of this late hour fatigue are vivid and cruel. The smell of the oil has changed. It no longer smells like a machine shop, but like something organic and rotting. The dust in the air has settled into a thick, dry coating on your lips, and every time you swallow, you feel the fluff from Section 5 rasping against your throat. You think about that small beer you had for lunch, the one with the hint of strychnine, and you find yourself wishing for another drop just to dull the sensation of your own existence. You are so tired that the noise of the looms has started to sound like music. A dark industrial symphony with a percussion section made of slamming wood and hissing steam. If you start humming along, you know you're in trouble. You watch an older man across the aisle. He's probably 40, which in mill years makes him an ancient relic. His back is permanently curved into the shape of the machine he's tended for 30 years. He moves with a slow, agonizing deliberation, his hands gnarled and stained a permanent charcoal black. He's a ghost of Christmas future for your career. There is no retirement plan in 1850. There is no pension, no 401k, and no gold watch ceremony. You work until you can't, and when you can't, you move to the next stage of the Victorian experience, which we'll get to later, but let's just say it involves a lot of gray stone and even thinner gruel. For now, your only retirement is the 10 minutes of sleep you're going to get when your head finally hits that straw mat. The overlooker is getting cranky too. He's been on his feet just as long as you, though his job involves more shouting and less manual labor. He's pacing the floor with a heavy cane, looking for anyone whose hanks per hour have dropped. He's the personification of the productivity app you have on your phone, only he's made of leather, tobacco breath, and a complete lack of empathy. He knows that as the night deepens, the workers become slower and more prone to slackness. He views your exhaustion not as a physical limit, but as a moral failing that can be corrected with a sharp word or a fine. You piece a thread with a frantic, shaky hand as he passes, your heart jumping like a frightened animal. A modern comparison for this level of fatigue is hard to find. It's not just being tired after a long day, it's a kind of exhaustion that changes your personality. It makes you irritable, it makes you weep for no reason, and it makes the chalk bread you have left in your pocket look like a gourmet feast. You find yourself hallucinating slightly in the flickering gaslight. The drive belts look like snakes. The piles of cotton waste look like sleeping sheep. You blink hard and the world snaps back into its grimy, mechanical reality. You have to keep moving. If you stop, the cold will catch you or the overlooker will, and either way, you lose. The St. Monday tradition we mentioned earlier, that quirky habit of workers taking Monday off because they were too exhausted or drunk from their one day of rest on Sunday, is starting to make perfect sense to you. By the time you reach the 18th hour of your shift, you'd trade your own soul for a Monday where you didn't have to hear the word spindle. But for now, that's a luxury for the skilled workers or the lucky ones. For you, there is only the now, the endless, vibrating, oil-scented now. You look at the clock again, 8:30 p.m. The final whistle is close, but in this state, an hour feels like a decade. As the steam pressure finally begins to drop and the rhythm of the floor slows, you don't feel a sense of joy. You're too tired for joy. You feel a sense of hollow relief, like a soldier who survived a battle but knows there's another one tomorrow at dawn. You stand there, your hand still twitching in the piecing motion as the great engine lets out a long, dying sigh. The noise fades, the silence rushes back in, and your ears start that familiar, high-pitched scream. You've survived the shift, you've endured the endless hour, but as you turn toward the exit, your legs feeling like leaden weights, you realize that the day isn't over yet. You still have to find your way home through the dark, and you still have to figure out how to do this all over again in 5 hours. The final whistle has finally blown, and the silence is so heavy it feels like a physical weight pressing against your eardrums. You stumble out of the factory gates, your legs moving on autopilot, your mind a foggy landscape of exhaustion. But tonight isn't just any night. Tonight is payday. In your modern life, payday is a digital notification on your phone, a satisfying ding that tells you your bank balance has magically increased while you were complaining about the commute. You might celebrate by ordering a slightly more expensive takeout or finally buying that pair of shoes in your saved folder. Here, payday is a physical ordeal, a final hurdle of exploitation that makes the 14-hour shift look like a warm-up act. You join the queue outside the pay office, a small brick hut where the cashier sits behind a heavy iron grate. You're expecting the jingle of silver shillings, the solid weight of a copper penny, real money you can take to the local market to buy a decent piece of bacon. But when you finally reach the window, the man doesn't hand you coins of the realm. Instead, he slides a handful of metal discs across the counter. They're stamped with the factory's logo and the words, "Exchangeable only at the company store." This is script or truck, and you've just been initiated into one of the most effective financial traps in human history. It is a mainstream historical fact that the truck system, deriving from the French word troquer, meaning to barter, was a widespread practice where employers paid their workers in goods or tokens rather than cash. While the Truck Act of 1831 technically made this illegal in many industries, factory owners were masters of the workaround. They'd simply open a shop near the mill, often run by the owner's brother-in-law or a trusted overlooker, and strongly suggest that anyone who didn't spend their wages there might find themselves at the top of the layoff list. It's the 19th century version of your boss paying you in Amazon gift cards that can only be used to buy items from his own basement. You trudge over to the Tommy shop, the quirky, fringe nickname for these company stores. Some say the name comes from Tommy, a slang term for bread or provisions, while others argue it refers to a specific, particularly hated storekeeper. Regardless of the etymology, the experience is the same. The shop is a dimly lit, cramped room that smells of damp flour and rancid lard. Because you are a captive audience, the prices here are 20% to 30% higher than at the independent market in town. You're essentially being charged a poverty tax for the privilege of working yourself to death. Historians still argue whether the truck system was a purely predatory tool of capitalist greed or if it was, in some remote industrial model villages, a logistical necessity. In areas where factories were built far from existing towns, owners argued they provided a vital service by ensuring their workers had access to food and fuel. Some scholars even suggest it was a way to prevent workers from spending their entire paycheck on gin the moment they left the factory. From your perspective, however, as you look at the wilted vegetables and the chalk breads on the shelves, the logistical necessity argument feels like a very thin veil for a very fat profit margin. You hand over your tokens for a small bag of flour. It feels gritty between your fingers, more of that bone meal or alum filler we talked about earlier. You ask for tea, and the shopkeeper hands you a packet that looks suspiciously like dried hawthorn leaves mixed with floor sweepings. It's a quirky, dark reality of the era that recycled tea was a major industry. Used tea leaves were collected from wealthy houses, refreshed with sheep dung or copper carbonate to restore the color, and sold back to the poor. You're essentially drinking the third-hand shadows of someone else's breakfast. The most insidious part of the truck system isn't the high prices, it's the debt. Because your wages are often insufficient to cover the basic cost of living at the company store, you find yourself buying on the book. The storekeeper meticulously records your purchases, and by next payday, you realize that your entire wage has already been spent before you even receive the tokens. You are owned by the company. Well, it's a modern comparison, but you're living in a high-stakes version of an in-app purchase cycle where the app is your actual life and the purchases are the only thing keeping you from starving. As you leave the Tommy shop, your heavy bag of subpar flour slung over your shoulder, you see the skilled workers, the engineers or the mule spinners, who were lucky enough to be paid in actual coin. They're heading toward the beer house, a luxury you can't afford tonight. You feel a sharp, biting envy. In the Victorian social hierarchy, even among the poor, the truck worker is seen as a lower tier, someone so precarious they can't even be trusted with their own money. It's a blow to your dignity that hurts almost as much as your aching back. The sensory details of the shop linger on you. The dusty, suffocating smell of the dry goods, the oily feel of the tokens in your pocket. You think about your 21st century bank account with its autosave features and cashback rewards. Here, the only reward is the realization that you have enough flour to last until Tuesday, provided you don't mind the taste of chalk. You realize that your survival in this era isn't just about physical endurance, it's about navigating a financial system designed to keep you exactly where you are, tired, hungry, and dependent. You start the walk home, your clogs clicking rhythmically on the cobbles. The moon is a pale, silver sliver behind the perpetual shroud of smog. You have a few tokens left, not enough for meat, but maybe enough for a tallow candle so you don't have to sit in the dark. But even the candles at the Tommy shop are shoddy. They're made of low-grade fat that sputters and smells like a wet dog. You realize that in the Victorian factory world, everything is shoddy. The clothes, the food, the air, and the very money you earn. You are a shoddy worker for a shoddy empire, and as the cold night air hits your lungs, you wonder if you'll ever earn enough real money to buy your way out of this gray, vibrating dream. You think back to that crocodile dung sunscreen again. At least that was a choice, a weird bit of ancient vanity. Here, the truck system is a mandatory ritual, a slow-motion robbery that leaves you with nothing but a bag of dust and a debt that grows faster than the soot on the windows. You take a deep breath, the sulfur and the recycled tea smell mixing in your throat, and you keep walking. The Tommy shop is behind you, but the trap is firmly shut, and tomorrow morning the bell will ring again, calling you back to the machine that you are now paying to serve. The journey home is a blur of gray shadows and the sharp, rhythmic clatter of your clogs against the slick cobblestones. You aren't heading toward a cozy suburban house with a manicured lawn and a home sweet home doormat. You are heading toward a rookery. In your modern life, overcrowded might mean having to share a bathroom with 2 roommates or living in a city where the subway is a bit too packed during rush hour. Here, overcrowding is an art form of human misery. A rookery is a dense, labyrinthine slum where the buildings seem to lean against each other for support, like a group of drunks at the end of a long night. The air here is even thicker than in the factory, a stagnant, heavy brew of coal smoke, rotting refuse, and the collective breath of thousands of people packed into a space meant for hundreds. You find your tenement building, a crumbling brick shell that was likely a grand house a century ago before being partitioned into 100 tiny cells. There is no lobby, just a dark, damp hallway that smells of night soil and wet wool. You navigate the stairs by touch. The wood is so worn in the center of each step that it feels like a shallow bowl. You reach your door, or rather the door to the room you share with 7 other people. This is your home, but there is no privacy here. Privacy is a luxury for the middle class, those people you see from a distance who wear clean collars and don't smell like machine grease. Here, every sound, every cough, and every whispered argument is public property. It is a mainstream historical fact that Victorian urban housing was a catastrophe of unplanned growth. As people flooded from the countryside to the factories, slum lords maximized their profits by subdividing rooms with nothing more than a hanging sheet or a thin wooden board. In some parts of London's East End or Manchester's Little Ireland, it was not uncommon for a single room to house 3 different families, one in each corner and one in the middle. You step over a sleeping figure near the door. You don't know who they are and you're too tired to care. They might be a lodger who paid a penny to sleep on the floor for the night, or they might be a distant cousin you haven't been introduced to yet. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these tenements that illustrates the sheer ingenuity of the poor. The 4-penny coffin. If you couldn't afford a room or even a corner, you could pay 4 pennies to sleep in a wooden box that looked exactly like a coffin, lined with a thin mattress. It was slightly better than the 2-penny hangover rope we discussed earlier because you could actually lie down. It's a modern comparison, but it's a 19th century version of a Japanese capsule hotel, only with more bedbugs and a significantly higher chance of catching a fever. You look at your own straw mat in the corner. It's not a coffin, but it's not much better. It's damp, and as you sit down, you can hear the dry rustle of the straw and the scurrying of the uninvited guests who live inside it. Historians still argue whether the rookeries were purely the result of economic exploitation or if they represented a total failure of the Victorian government to understand the scale of the Industrial Revolution. For decades, the official policy was laissez-faire, letting the market decide. And the market decided that a worker didn't need a window, a toilet, or more than 4 square feet of space. Looking at the mold creeping up the wall in a pattern that looks vaguely like a map of the British Empire, the market feels like a very cruel god. You feel the damp in your bones, a deep, aching chill that no amount of itchy wool can cure. The sensory experience of the rookery at night is a cacophony of human life. You hear the rhythmic snoring of your roommates, the distant wail of a hungry infant, and the scratching of rats in the floorboards. The smell is a thick layering of old sweat, the metallic tang of your own factory-stained skin, and the sulfurous gas from a nearby street lamp that leaks through the cracks in the window frame. You try to take off your boots, but your feet have swollen so much during your 16-hour shift that the leather seems to have fused with your skin. You have to peel them off, and the relief of the air hitting your feet is almost painful. You think back to your smart home in the 21st century, the one where you can change the lighting to warm amber, with a voice command. Here, your ambient lighting is a single tallow candle you bought with your truck tokens. It gutters and flickers, casting long, monstrous shadows of the furniture. The furniture consists of a broken crate that serves as a table and a single chair with 3 legs balanced against the wall. You look at the chalk bread you brought home. You should eat it, but your stomach is a knot of exhaustion and mill fever. You decide to save it for the breakfast you'll have in 4 hours. There's a strange, grim intimacy in this overcrowding. You know the breathing patterns of everyone in the room. You know who has the Victorian hack cough and who talks in their sleep about the village they left behind 10 years ago. It's a collective existence where your own identity is blurred by the proximity of others. You are just a unit of labor, even in your sleep. You find yourself staring at the ceiling, watching a spider weave a web in the corner. You feel a weird sense of kinship with it. It's a weaver too, working in the dark, trying to survive on whatever flies into its trap. A modern comparison for this living situation might be a squat, but even a squat usually has better ventilation. In the rookery, the windows are often small and fixed shut to keep out the miasma, or they're broken and stuffed with rags to keep out the freezing rain. There is no fresh air. There is only the air that has already been through 20 other pairs of lungs. You feel heaviness in your chest, the cotton lung making its presence felt with every shallow breath. You try to lie down, but the straw is lumpy and the floor is cold. As the candle flickers out, leaving you in a darkness that is never truly silent, you realize that home isn't a place of rest. It's just a different kind of endurance. You are waiting for the sun to not quite rise behind the smog, and for the knocker up to come and tap on that grimy window pane. You've survived the factory, you've survived the pay office, and now you're surviving the night. You close your eyes, the vibration of the loom still humming in your inner ear, and you wonder if, in your dreams, you can finally find a room with a door that locks and a window that shows the stars. But the rats keep scratching, the neighbors keep coughing, and the city of soot continues to groan around you, a giant machine that never truly sleeps. You wake up, if you can even call it that, with a throat that feels like it's been scrubbed with a wire brush and then used to filter chimney soot. The pauper's tea and the strychnine light beer from yesterday have left your mouth tasting like a copper penny dipped in vinegar. Your body is screaming for hydration. In your 21st century life, you just reach for a chilled bottle of electrolyte water or turn on a faucet that provides an endless stream of filtered, fluoride-protected goodness. Here, your smart hydration system is a heavy iron handle located 3 blocks away in the middle of a muddy square. You grab your communal tin cup and stumble out into the pre-dawn grayness, heading toward the Broad Street pump. You aren't alone. The morning rush at the pump is the Victorian equivalent of the office water cooler. Only, instead of gossiping about the latest Netflix series, everyone is just trying to get enough liquid to swallow their chalk bread without choking. As you stand in line, you notice the water coming out of the pump. It looks, surprisingly good. It's clear, it's cold, and it has a certain sparkle to it that the murky canal water lacks. You think you've hit the jackpot. This is the high-end water of the slums. But here is where your modern knowledge becomes a curse. You're standing in Soho in 1854, and you're looking at the epicenter of a biological war zone. It is a mainstream historical fact that this specific pump was the source of one of the most famous cholera outbreaks in history, leading to the birth of modern epidemiology thanks to a doctor named John Snow. While everyone else thinks the sparkle is a sign of purity, you know it's actually the result of nitrates leaching into the well from a nearby cesspit. You are essentially about to drink a sewage soda. You watch a neighbor, a woman whose hands are still stained with the emerald arsenic dye of the silk mills, fill her bucket. She takes a long, deep draught and sighs with relief. To her, the miasma theory is the only explanation for why people are dying. She thinks as long as she can't smell anything foul in the water, she's safe. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that the residents of Broad Street actually fought to keep the pump open because they preferred the taste of its water to any other source in the city. They described it as having a pleasant, sharp tang. That tang was the taste of the neighborhood's collective waste filtering through the sandy soil. It's the ultimate forbidden flavor, a literal death wish disguised as a refreshing beverage. Historians still argue whether Jon Snow's famous removal of the pump handle was the definitive turning point that ended the outbreak, or if the epidemic had already peaked and was naturally subsiding by the time he took action. Regardless of the academic debate, standing here with your tin cup, the handle looks like the trigger of a loaded gun. You know that within 24 hours of drinking this, a person can go from perfectly healthy to a blue-skinned, dehydrated corpse. Cholera doesn't just make you sick, it turns your digestive system into a high-speed exit ramp for every drop of fluid in your body. It's a modern comparison, but drinking from this pump is like clicking on a free iPhone link in a suspicious email. The reward is a total system crash that you probably won't recover from. The sensory details around the pump are a masterclass in Victorian neglect. The ground is a slurry of mud, horse manure, and spilled water that never quite dries. The smell is a sharp, acidic mix of damp stone and the nearby dust heaps, massive mounds of household waste and ash that the city's scavengers haven't cleared yet. You feel the cold iron of the pump handle. It's slick with the sweat and grime of the hundreds of people who had touched it this morning. In a world without germ theory, the handle is a communal petri dish. You think about your modern hand sanitizer, that little bottle of 70% alcohol that you use after touching a subway pole. Here, your only sanitizer is the hope that you have a particularly sturdy stomach and a very lucky immune system. You hesitate. Your thirst is a physical pain, a throbbing in your temples that matches the rhythm of the distant factory whistles. You look into the cup. The water is perfectly still, reflecting the gray, soot-streaked sky above. You see a tiny, almost invisible fleck of something white floating on the surface. Is it just fluff from the mills, or is it a million microscopic executioners waiting to pull the plug on your life? You realize that in the 1850s, in every sip of water is a liquid lottery. If you don't drink, you die of dehydration and heat stroke on the factory floor. If you do drink, you might die of the Blue Death by sunset. It's a choice between two different types of not surviving. There's a cynical humor in how the city officials handle the crisis. They're still wandering around with bags of lime and vinegar, trying to clean the air because they're convinced the smell of the slums is what's killing people. They view the water as a secondary issue. You see a searcher of the dead, usually an elderly woman hired by the parish to identify causes of death, walking past with a grim expression. She'll likely Mark down the next victim as having died of visitation of God or the flux. It's a world where the cause of death is often just a poetic way of saying, we have no idea what's happening, but everything is terrible. You take a sip. You have to. The mill fever is already making your head spin, and you won't survive the next 12-hour shift without some kind of fuel. The water is cold, shockingly so, and it does have that sharp taste the neighbors raved about. It feels like a betrayal. How can something that feels so life-giving be so inherently lethal? You think about the waterborne diseases of your own time, rare things you read about in travel advisories for distant countries. Here, the travel advisory is just your daily life. You are a biological explorer in the most dangerous territory on Earth, a London slum during a heat wave. As you walk back toward the factory, the clank-clank of the pump handle behind you sounds like a funeral bell. You see the children from Section 5 crowding around the pump, their small, oily hands cupping the water as if it's a precious treasure. You want to scream at them to stop, to tell them about the cesspits and the bacteria and the man with the map who's going to save them in a few years. But you're just another soot-covered face in the crowd, and your voice would be drowned out by the roar of the engine of progress anyway. You feel a slight gurgle in your stomach. Is it the chalk bread? Is it the strychnine beer? Or is it the Broad Street Sparkle beginning its work? You won't know for hours, and in the Victorian factory, hours are an eternity. You realize that your survival isn't just about dodging gears or avoiding arsenic, it's about the very basic primal act of drinking. You've just participated in the world's most dangerous happy hour, and the bill won't arrive until you're back at your loom, under the flickering gaslight, miles away from the pump that might have just signed your death warrant. You tuck your tin cup into your belt, the metal cold against your hip, and you head back toward the smoke, a walking sleep of a human being who is currently 70% contaminated water and 100% terrified. The Broad Street Sparkle is currently doing a slow, ominous waltz in your digestive tract, and you can feel the mill fever from Section 10 beginning to sharpen into a genuine pounding migraine. Your vision is swimming, and every clack thud of the looms feels like a physical blow to your temples. You need a miracle. In your modern life, this would involve a quick trip to the pharmacy for some ibuprofen, or perhaps a natural remedy like peppermint oil and a dark room. Here, your pharmacy is a dark, shelf-lined corner of a grocery store, and your miracle comes in a small brown glass bottle with a fancy embossed label. You reach for the Victorians' favorite Swiss Army knife of medicine, laudanum. You uncork the bottle, and the smell immediately hits you. A sickly sweet, earthy aroma that hides a dark, bitter undertone. Laudanum is essentially a high-proof alcohol tincture of opium. It's a mainstream historical fact that opium was the foundation of Victorian medicine. It was the aspirin of the 19th century, used for everything from toothaches and headaches to hysteria and the green sickness, because it was cheaper than a bottle of gin and perfectly legal to buy over the counter. The entire working class was essentially floating in a poppy-induced haze. You take a swig. It tastes like dirt and regret, but within minutes, the sharp edges of the factory roar begin to soften. The pain in your joints doesn't go away, but it starts to feel like it's happening to someone else about 3 feet to your left. Historians still argue whether the Great Victorian drug habit was a deliberate method used by the ruling class to keep the labor force docile and medicated against the horrors of their environment, or if it was simply the only effective painkiller available in a pre-antibiotic world. Some scholars point out that even responsible doctors would prescribe laudanum for something as simple as a fussy baby. Remember Godfrey's cordial from section 1? From where you're standing, leaning heavily against your spinning frame, the social control theory feels a bit too organized. The reality is simpler. When your life is a 16-hour endurance test in a room full of noise and poison, anything that makes the world feel softer is a survival tool. But here's the quirky fringe tidbit that makes your 21st century skin crawl. Because the patent medicine market was completely unregulated, your healing tonic might contain things that would make a modern toxicologist faint. To make the medicine look potent, quacks would often add ingredients like mercury, lead, or even spirits of salts, which is just a fancy name for hydrochloric acid. There was even a popular remedy called the poor man's friend that was basically just lard and lead. You're trying to cure a headache caused by lead poisoning by drinking a tonic that contains more lead. It's the ultimate circular economy of Victorian health, where the cure is just a slower version of the disease. The sensory experience of working while on the bottle is surreal. The factory becomes a dreamscape. The flickering gaslights turn into glowing orbs, and the leather belts look like graceful, moving ribbons rather than lethal whips. This is the danger zone. Laudanum makes you feel fine, but it also destroys your coordination and your sense of timing. You find yourself smiling at a gear that's inches from your hand, feeling a strange, detached curiosity about how it works. This is how mill ghosts are made. You've seen workers who became so addicted to the quietness of the opium that they'd spend their entire paycheck at the chemist, eventually losing their edge and getting swallowed by the machines they were too high to fear. A modern comparison for the laudanum habit isn't just pain management, it's more like being perpetually buffered. You're not fully present, but you're not entirely gone. It's a 19th century version of doom scrolling through your own consciousness to ignore the fact that your house is on fire. You think about your modern world's wellness culture, the yoga retreats, the clean eating, the meditation apps. Here, your mindfulness is a spoonful of Mother's Helper syrup and a hope that you don't fall into the loom before the shift ends. You feel a strange, hollow euphoria, a lightness in your chest that makes you want to laugh at the overlooker. But you don't. You know that if you laugh, you'll break the spell and the roar of the mill will come rushing back in to crush you. The quackery of the era wasn't just limited to bottles either. You see a man at the next station wearing a galvanic belt, a leather strap with pieces of copper and zinc sewn into it that was supposed to electrify the blood and cure everything from rheumatism to moral weakness. It's essentially a 19th century Fitbit, but instead of tracking your steps, it's supposed to provide a healing current that actually just gives you a nasty skin rash. You watch him adjust it with a look of desperate hope. In a world where real medicine is a mystery, magic starts to look like a very reasonable alternative. You touch the bottle in your pocket, feeling the cold glass. It's your magic, your only defense against the industrial attrition that's trying to grind your spirit into dust. As the afternoon wears on, the laudanum starts to wear off, and the crash is spectacular. The noise returns with a vengeance, sounding 10 times louder than before. Your stomach, already battling the Broad Street sparkle, lets out a groan that you can hear even over the machines. The opium constipation meets the cholera cramp in a biological standoff that makes you double over. You realize that your survival via the bottle was just a temporary loan, and now the interest is due. You are shivering, despite the humid, wet heat of the weaving shed. Your hands are shaking so badly you can't piece a thread to save your life. The overlooker is watching you now. He knows that shaky hand. He's seen 1,000 workers on the bottle before. To him, you aren't a human in pain. You're a faulty component that needs to be replaced. You think back to that crocodile dung sunscreen. At least that was an external problem. This, the quackery in your veins, is an internal betrayal. You realize that surviving the Victorian era isn't just about outrunning the machines, it's about outrunning the remedies that are supposed to keep you going. You take one last desperate swig from the bottle, hoping to catch that buffer one more time, but the bottle is empty. There is only the glass, the grit, and the realization that the miracle has run out just when you needed it most. You look at the clock. 5:30 p.m. The dark hours are coming and you are no longer medicated. You are just a raw, vibrating nerve in a room full of steel. You piece a thread, your fingers fumbling, and you wonder if the Fossey jaw glow from Section 8 is starting to look like a better option than this medicine that's leaving you hollow. You stand your ground, your heart hammering against your ribs as the Victorian factory prepares to take its final pound of flesh for the day. You are a survivor. Yes, but you're a survivor who's currently learning that in 1850, the medicine is often the most dangerous thing in the room. The shift is finally over, but as you stand there, the silence isn't a relief. It's a terrifying void. You try to move, but your legs simply refuse to obey. The Broad Street Sparkle has joined forces with the laudanum crash and the mill fever to create a biological mutiny. You collapse against the oily wooden floorboards, your fingers still twitching in that phantom piecing motion. The overlooker doesn't come over to offer a hand or ask if you need a doctor. He simply looks at you, notes your name in his ledger, and makes a small, definitive X next to it. In that moment, you realize the most terrifying truth of your Victorian existence. You are no longer a hand, you are a broken part. And in this world, broken parts aren't repaired, they are discarded. Your survival has reached its final, most daunting hurdle, the one that waits for you when the factory doors close for the last time. You are heading toward the parish workhouse. In your modern life, unemployment or disability might mean a series of bureaucratic hurdles, some frustrating paperwork, and a modest safety net that allows you to stay in your home while you recover. Here, the safety net is made of iron bars and social shame. The workhouse, or the Bastille, as the poor affectionately called it, was the ultimate deterrent. It was designed by the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 to be so deliberately miserable that no one would ever choose to go there unless they were literally at death's door. It is a mainstream historical fact that the principle of less eligibility governed these institutions. Life inside the workhouse had to be worse than the lowest, most grueling life outside it. Considering you've been eating chalk bread and breathing arsenic for 16 hours a day, the fact that the workhouse is worse should tell you everything you need to know. You are transported there in a rickety cart, feeling every bump in the cobblestones like a knife in your spine. As you approach the massive stone gates, the architecture itself tries to crush your spirit. It's a fortress of gray, unadorned brick designed to look like a prison. You are stripped of your factory grease clothes, the only things that still link you to your identity as a worker, and forced into a parish uniform of coarse, scratchy gray wool. Your hair is shorn, your few remaining possessions are confiscated, and you are separated from anyone you might know. Families were routinely split up, husbands from wives, parents from children, because the Victorian authorities believed that poverty was a contagious moral failing that shouldn't be allowed to spread through domestic affection. Historians still argue whether the workhouse system was a necessary evil to manage the overwhelming poverty of the industrial era, or if it was a calculated act of state-sponsored cruelty intended to create a submissive, desperate labor force. Some argue that without the workhouse, the mobs of the unemployed would have burnt the cities to the ground. Others point to the Andover workhouse scandal, where starving inmates were found gnawing on the marrow of rotting bones they were supposed to be crushing for fertilizer. From your perspective, as you're handed a bowl of gruel, a thin, watery porridge that makes your factory lunch look like a feast, the academic debate is irrelevant. The reality is that you have transitioned from being a slave to the machine to a slave to the parish. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about workhouse labor that highlights the absurdity of the system. Oakum picking. Your new job is to take old tarry ropes from ships and unpick them with your bare fingernails until they are reduced to loose fibers again. The tar is hard and black, and within hours your fingers are bleeding. It's a completely useless task in the age of steam, but that's the point. The labor has to be monotonous and unproductive to ensure you don't enjoy your stay. It's a modern comparison, but it's like being forced to manually delete a million spam emails one by one. Only the emails are made of stinging hemp, and the delete key is your own raw skin. The sensory details of the workhouse are a monochromatic nightmare. The smell is no longer the dynamic filth of the factory. It's a static smell of lye soap, damp stone, and the clinical cold scent of institutional despair. The silence is enforced. Talking during meals or work is a punishable offense. You live in a world of whispers and the rhythmic thud scrape of bone crushing or oakum picking. You think back to the roar of the looms. At least that roar meant you were part of something, a cog in the engine of the world. Here, you are just a ghost waiting for a pauper's grave. You realize that surviving the factory was the easy part. Surviving the mercy of the Victorian state is the real challenge. As you lie on your hard wooden cot in the dormitory, listening to the collective, hollow breathing of 50 other broken parts, the imagery of your journey begins to fade. The vibrating floors, the pea super fogs, the Broad Street sparkle, and the Fossey Jaw glow all merge into a single, distant memory of a life you once thought was hard. You realize that you didn't survive because you were stronger or smarter. You survived because the machine wasn't finished with you yet. And now that it is, the world has grown very quiet, very cold, and very gray. The roar of the mill has finally drifted away, replaced by the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The heavy iron gears and the snapping leather belts are gone now, dissolving into the shadows of history. You are no longer standing on that vibrating wooden floor, and the weight of the soot and the chalk bread has been lifted from your shoulders. You are safe. You are back in your own time, in your own bed, wrapped in blankets that are soft and clean and yours. The air around you is clear and cool, free. From the sulfur and the miasma of the rookeries, feel the tension leave your joints, the ache in your knees, the tightness in your back, the phantom piecing motion of your fingers. It's all melting away. You are heavy, sinking into the mattress, becoming part of the stillness of the night. The stories of the scavengers and the oilers are just echoes now, distant whispers from a world that moved too fast for its own good. You have endured the journey, and now you have earned the rest. There are no bells to wake you, no knocker ups to tap on your window, and no machines that demand your hands. The darkness is gentle here. It's a soft velvet curtain that shields you from the world. Let your thoughts drift like the fluff in the air, but without the weight or the worry. You are drifting into a sleep that is deep and undisturbed, a sleep where the only rhythm is the calm, slow beat of your own heart. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. The factory has closed its gates, and the city of soot has finally fallen silent. Sleep now, knowing that the journey is over and the morning will bring only the soft, golden light